I am with the Survive and Thrive Advocacy Center. I'm the executive director. My name is Robin Hassler Thompson, and I'm a member of the Big Bend Coalition Against Human Trafficking, which is our local trafficking coalition right here in Florida's Big Bend. So we're in the north part of Florida and the Panhandle. Our coalition meets quarterly. We meet to network, and we always have really interesting, compelling speakers. If you are in our area, please join us. You don't have to be an official person like with a state agency or in an organization. You can be a member of a community, a faith community, anyone, a student. We'd love to have you. I just found out yesterday after I worked on these slides that our next meeting will probably not be August 3. It may be a month later. So don't write that in your calendars yet. We'll get that corrected. Next slide, please. And STAC, here we are. STAC is the Survive and Thrive Advocacy Center. We're a nonprofit agency, and we do two things. Grounding us, and most important of all, is the assistance and the support we provide to trafficking survivors of both sex and labor trafficking. And I just saw my dear, wonderful colleague, Graciela Marquina, who is our community services advocate and does that work, has joined us. We provide individual care management or case management. We only do this with the help and support of many partners in our area. As you know, this issue of human trafficking, sex and labor trafficking is so broad and so wide that there's no way one agency can do it all. And it's vital. And I'm so glad to look at the chat, by the way, and see people from all over the state, from many different areas, many different disciplines also joining. So thank you. And that's the way I'm sure you do the work in your communities. We provide community education. These programs are part of that. We actually started before the pandemic doing these in person, but when the pandemic happened, we went online, and they've been really interesting and successful, I think. You all are evidence of that today again. So thank you for doing that. And we also tailor training specific to agencies, organizations, industries, etc. Next slide, please. There we go. So part of our community education is giving lots and lots of information online. We'll be sharing in the chat links to things as they come up, but know that we have tons of materials. We have this program and past webinars are all on our website, and we'll put that link up for you. You can always go back and listen. You can share this with your colleagues after you finish today. I know you're going to say, this is so wonderful. You're going to want to share with everybody, right? But you'll be able to do that. And while the USF team that you just saw, Cassandra, won't be giving you certificates, we at STAC can give you an attendance certificate if you let us know when you watch one of these later. We have toolkits. We have the community partner toolkit. So that's general information for anyone in the community to share, to open the doors to people's minds about what trafficking is and what they can do. And we also have the youth and caregiver toolkit that I hope Jamie, one of our speakers, is going to talk about today, because she worked on this and was vital to our getting this produced. We've got posters, and there's our website there. All of our services are free of charge, of course, just like this program. But I will tell you, if you ever want to go on our website and support our work with a gift, we will be most happy to have that support from you. Next slide, please. One of the most interesting and compelling things that we've done most recently is we have launched a podcast. And I know you might be saying, this is just what the world needs, another podcast. But this is a different one. And because of the work we do here at STAC, I've tried to listen to and just really comb the airwaves, if you will, or the internet, and listen to what people have done on trafficking. There's some good stuff out there, no question. This is the only one I've been able to find that talks solely and exclusively with survivors of human trafficking. to let us know what they want us to know about this issue, how to prevent it, maybe, what they're doing now, how they do their work, how we can do our work better with their advice and support. So know that this is one of our new and very exciting things. Totally encourage you. They're 20 minutes long. You'll learn tons. And it's really a great thing to do. Thank you, Graciela. I see you've put the website as well as our toolkit for youth and caregivers in the chat. Thank you. Okay, next slide, please. We also do training online, in person, and in all ways. And know that this stackpro.org is a adjacent sister website to us. This is what we developed to train all workplaces, for-profit, nonprofits, banks, retail, restaurants, hospitality, offices, you name your workplace, this training will help you. It will help you if you're a volunteer. It'll help you if you're a consumer who goes into any of these places, to be able to understand and recognize really the scope and what trafficking will look like. So thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, well, here we go into our program, and I ask our speakers, Kristen and Jamie, to go ahead and turn their videos on so I can start to do an introduction. So first, hey, so I'd love you all to meet our two speakers today. Kristen Murray is a native of Jacksonville, Florida, and the creator of Authentic Witness. Kristen graduated from Florida A&M University with a BS in journalism and an MA in strategic communication and digital strategy from the University of Oklahoma. She's always been fascinated with the life stories of other people and believes that people sharing these stories or giving witness is a way to spread knowledge and healing. Kristen has worked as a teacher, journalist, and has spent almost a decade in the nonprofit sector. And Kristen, in your bio, I just have to tell you this part, I love everything in it. But the thing I really love is when you say you've completed your journey as a certified breathwork practitioner to help people soothe their somatic systems and reconnect with their innermost self. Thank you. You've made the world a better place in all these ways. So I really appreciate that. And it's really been a delight to be able to meet you and to plan this event and to be with you today. I know I'm going to learn tons from you. So thank you so much. And thank you to Jamie Rosland, who introduced us, Kristen. So Jamie is a consultant in the field of anti-trafficking work with expertise in the program development and implementation for victims and survivors of sexual exploitation, trauma competent, and survivor-centered digital marketing and outreach strategies. Most recently, she's been working on policy guides and research projects. And I can tell you that Jamie, now you've been working with us for a couple of years now, I think, and your work has so enhanced us from our website, the audit. You should know that Jamie has skills that are great. She's a great editor. She's a great thinker. She's a great writer. She's a great interviewer. She does all these things, and we're so lucky that you do that with us at Stack. So thank you for that. Jamie's won awards. She's been a mentor. She's really worked with a lot of great organizations in the state. So Jamie, I'm really grateful for your helping with this and all the things you help me to understand better about this issue and our world. And also, you should know the podcast that I just gave you a little commercial about. Jamie also did one of our podcasts, so you can stay tuned for that getting announced and out there within the next couple months. So Jamie and Kristen, welcome. And would you like to say anything and start us out with anything before we get into it?
I think the biggest thing is just a huge thank you to you, Robin, and to you, Jamie, for making this space possible, and all of the other organizations who are part of this important work. We're excited to have the opportunity to just chat with y'all today, to hear your hearts around this work, and to just share some of our insights with you. So our hope is that you leave with something, and we also leave with something as we continue to exchange and share ideas for today. So that's all. Just excited to be in the space with y'all.
Thank you. Jamie, would you like to say anything?
Yeah, for sure. I definitely echo Kristen's sentiments. I really appreciate being able to be here today to talk about trafficking and anti-violence. And yeah, I appreciate Stack for, continuing on with this like great web series where it just brings so many people together to talk about these issues.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Cassandra, I think we can go and just see our faces and maybe, unless, there we go. Why don't we do this for a sec and we'll get it started. And then, Kristen, I think you're going to show your slides in a minute too. So yeah. Okay. So, where do I start? I am so grateful for the opportunity to have this conversation. And for those of you who have been with us before, you should know we're going to have maybe 3 slides. This is the first time in a third Friday, we're going to open it up for questions and discussion. Our conversation today is not going to be PowerPoint driven. It's going to be driven by us talking to each other and talking with you about your thoughts on this very, very sort of huge contextual look at the world that human trafficking occurs in, and how we as individuals, as people who work, as people who are in families or whatever we're doing, that we can make a difference and make this a nonviolent place where all of the things, all of these traumas that have happened to people and are happening just don't take place or are immediately get reduced. I think one of the things I love the most about this when we were planning is to let everyone know who's on this call. And I'm just going to check in the chat for a sec. If you haven't put your info in here, there are people in guardian ad litem, in the state attorney's office, and in rape treatment centers, people who are with Hope Florida Pathway to Prosperity with DCF. We have people at state agencies. If you're working in anything, if you're working in helping people get housing, have substance use disorders, people are maybe addicted in other ways, you're doing anti-trafficking work. It was a long lead in to say that one last sentence, but you are all doing anti-human trafficking work. So with that, that's kind of setting the stage for where we're going. Okay, so do you want to do your first slide, Kristen?
I was actually going to wait until the end to do the slides, just so that we can chat, if that's okay.
Okay, great. So this is the other thing. We want you to put into the chat, into the Q&A, when you have questions or comments. If we use a weird acronym, or if we say something that you want to know a little bit more about, please put that in the Q&A, put that in the chat, and we'll do our best to respond. What Jamie and Kristen have done is put together a series of questions these are going to spark our discussions. So I'm going to start out as you have requested in our kind of scripted program together today. So I want to start today's discussion by reading this powerful quote about nonviolence from Coretta Scott King. I must remind you that a starving child is violence. Neglecting school children is violence. Punishing a mother and her family is violence. Discrimination against a working man is violence. Ghetto housing is violence. Ignoring medical need is violence. Contempt for poverty is violence. So, Kristen, how do you define nonviolence and violence in the context of this very powerful quote?
So every time I hear that quote, Robin, my heart does a little jump because it's a reminder about just how violent our world can be, and also about what we're called to see as violence. And so you asked how I define it, and the truth is I don't have to, because Dr. and Mrs. King defined it way before I ever could. And so a little bit of background about me. I also spent a good amount of time working at the King Center in Atlanta, Georgia. And one of the things that always struck me about the concept of violence is that it shows up in what Dr. and Mrs. King refer to as the triple evils, which are, you might hear them referred to as the triple evils or the evil triplets, but they're the ways of violence shows up in our world, and it's poverty, racism, and militarism. And they're all forms of violence that exist in this cycle together, and they're interrelated. And so when you look at, questions around poverty and systemic poverty, they're typically linked to racism and militarism. And so underneath each of these triple evils, you'll see under poverty, whether that's hunger, unemployment, with racism, whether that's prejudice or homophobia or ageism, under militarism, whether that's war, imperialism, domestic violence, sexual abuse, terrorism, human trafficking. All of these are triple evils. And so one of the things I will say is that when you begin to work on one of them, you begin to see how interconnected they all are. And so for me, nonviolence is a love-centered way of thinking, speaking, engaging, and acting that really leads to personal, cultural, and societal transformation. So it's about, how do I begin with a love-centered way of thinking, not just thinking, but speaking, acting, and engaging. And there are days, y'all, where I don't want to be love-centered. I mean, if I'm keeping it 100, but in order to live non-violently, we have to center ourselves in love. And that leads to a personal revolution, right? Like, even in the way that I speak, like, there are certain things that I used to say that were super violent that I don't say anymore. Right. So that's personal, but then that leads to cultural and then societal. And so it does indeed start with you, and it also ripples out to our systems. And so, yeah, that's what violence and nonviolence to me mean through a Kingian lens, if I were to answer that question.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And what a perfect thing for us to be talking about in our day and age today. So what about some examples? One of the things we know, and you're a storyteller, I know, par excellence. So what can you provide, each of you provide examples of how different systems might perpetuate violence in our society? And then I guess the converse will be how systems don't, or wouldn't.
Yeah, when I think about systems perpetuating like violence, especially when I start thinking about like human trafficking, I think about this like one particular story of this girl who was DJJ involved, and she was also being trafficked. And so, she had, according to the Department of Juvenile Justice System, just absconded, was missing, didn't come to her court date. But she was away, being trafficked. She wasn't having a good old time, just, on the run. Terrible things were happening to her. But she was so scared of escaping and like coming back home, because to come home would mean immediate incarceration in a detention center. And so when I think about perpetuating violence, like, incarceration is so violent. And I don't think that's something that people usually connect. It's not just like the act of like being arrested and like brought to the jail, like being in a place where you don't have any choice or autonomy over your life is violent. So I think that's, one way our systems perpetuate it. But for, a teenage girl to have to choose between a place where she's being trafficked but feels she has some choice and autonomy, or going back home and knowing that she's going to have to be incarcerated for a period of time, and that isn't even necessarily going to stop the trafficking. It might just put a pause on it, put a hold on it for a little bit. So I think that's one example.
Yeah, and as you speak, I don't know, I can't speak for everyone, but I'm trying to calm my own need to say, and then what? And then what, so we're going to just reside. I'm going to ask everybody to just suspend all the whatever defense mechanisms might be coming up, and just sort of absorb what y'all are saying, and then we'll get to some of the practical realities. I know we will. So thank you for that. Thank you. Kristen, what about you?
Yeah, Robin, if I could, I'd like to give people a couple somatic tools to hold that charge, because I know that that's a charge you're holding right now. One of the ones that I oftentimes suggest is just rocking. Like if it's boiling up in you and bubbling up in you, just rock with it, you know. Other one that I would suggest is just touching your arm, bringing yourself down, right? Because the thing is that all of these stories, all of these tales are going to bring things up in us because we've seen them, we've experienced them, we've all been a part of these systems. And so it's okay to hold that charge, to know that it's there and it didn't get there by itself. It's hundreds of years old. That charge is going to be there. So just sit with it, rock through it, touch your arm, soothe yourself. We're going to get through it together. I will say for me, one of the ways that I've seen violence show up specifically with regards to trafficking is around housing, and laws about places, you know, agencies doing their best, right? Where they have certain criteria and laws about where you can stay and where you can't stay based on past charges. And I have experienced where a young woman that I was working with, she was just exhausted. She had tried several different times, several different ways. She had a lot of violent charges because she grew up in the foster care system and was then involved in human trafficking. And it was heartbreaking because she finally got to this space of like, I'm going to be on my own. Like I'm gonna, like it's going to happen for me. And everywhere she turned, she could not find a place to live. To the point that she eventually ended up staying with a friend. And that friend was also being trafficked. And so she was trying to move and shift her life, and the very systems that are supposed to support her as she's doing that are not. And so she got pulled back. And it's real and it happens. And so when we talk about violence, that to me is violent, because what happens when the places that are supposed to have the structures to support actually put more barriers in place. So that's an example.
Yeah. And transcending those barriers. You know, one of the things that Jamie, you and I recently, I mentioned, did a podcast together, and we talked a lot about sort of this wider lens look at anti-trafficking work as a discipline. You know, like STAC is anti-trafficking, but the only way we do our work is really trying and engaging with the rest of the community. But so how can this kind of work, or how can anti-trafficking work really transcend and be connected to, if you will, these various systems? And what can we do? Because really both of you, when you were talking, you know, if we don't get that housing to the person you were speaking about, Kristen, a trafficker will, right? That's just the bottom line.
Yeah. So it's really great that there's all these organizations that are focused specifically on like anti-trafficking work, and really being focused on providing those really specific services. And I think specific services that are honed to a particular need are necessary and needed and important. But trafficking doesn't happen in these like silos. And a lot of people coming out of trafficking, especially in the first couple of years, don't even recognize what they've experienced as necessarily trafficking. And then there's a lot of, you know, back and forth, and people conceptualizing, you know, exploitation, you know, as sex work. And then there's a lot of reasons that people try to find empowerment or create the narrative of empowerment about sex work. And so that convolutes it even further. And for me, however someone identifies their experience, they have the right to exit. And they have the right to services, and they have the right to live a life where that's not following them around. And so, I mean, really, when someone comes out of trafficking, there's this huge stigma, or when someone comes out of sex work, there's this huge stigma against them where maybe it's charges, you know, maybe it's, you know, some information about them online where it's really difficult for them to rebuild and create a life that feels like meaningful and where they're not subjugated to violence all the time. And so anti-trafficking work really goes so much broader than just the agencies that are specific to, you know, to that crime. And it goes broader to the people who identify as human trafficking survivors, you know, people who may have experienced that and don't identify, or identify solely as sex workers and would for the rest of their lives reject the labels human trafficking survivor. And so that means people working in domestic violence shelters are doing anti-trafficking work. It means that employers, you know, who give someone a second chance are doing anti-trafficking work. It means people who are making policies that are unrelated to trafficking, but that benefit, you know, the people are doing anti-trafficking work. And so it's really important to think about anti-trafficking work being broader than the incredible organizations that are focused solely on this, and really help people feel empowered to make a difference in this way, like in anti-trafficking work, without them even necessarily stepping into an anti-trafficking nonprofit. I know I've heard a lot of people talk about wanting to volunteer and, you know, support survivors or help people. And I think their vision of that is like being frontline somehow. And frontline like work, oh, that sounds like, now I'm just thinking about languages I use, Kristen, and like nonviolent, I'm like frontline, that's violent language. First responders, that sounds better. So first responders, just happening to me in the moment, being recorded.
I love that. I love that, friend. That's what it's about though, right?
But, you know, you know, the work of first responders is difficult and challenging, and you really need to have the like right people in there. But if, you know, you have a family company or you have some influence, you know, at an organization, just giving someone a second chance can be anti-trafficking work. You know, someone having the opportunity to, if you own property, you know, you can seek out people who need a second chance instead of just looking for the best renter. You can rent places for maybe a little under market value if you're able to. Like, there's so many ways to engage in anti-trafficking work, and a lot of it doesn't even require you to go out of what your day-to-day is. It just means shifting how you do things, and you know, as Kristen said, looking for love-centered ways. And maybe you're helping a trafficking survivor and maybe you're not, but you know, trying to make people who have suffered or suffering's lives easier, I think that always is going to benefit that person and the person assisting. So,
You know, also on a fundamental way, that's great that you painted that very broad picture, Jamie, because you know, I always think about trafficking is about the exploitation, like of someone for money or power, or, you know, we see greed and the economics as being so central to so much of this, and then people healing from it. If a door is closed in their face when they go to rent, or if they are trying to get a job or get health insurance, that's all coming back at them in, again, another economic way that's again a double whammy. You know, they were exploited and now they're trying to get back on their feet. But remembering that wherever you donate funds, wherever you like you say, have the opportunity to hire or house or provide education or support to a family, you're really doing prevention work as well. It's clearly doing prevention work. So yeah, a very powerful points. Kristen, a lot of your work and career has been based on creating better communities centering on nonviolent initiatives. So when you think about anti-trafficking work, how does the work that you've done with these nonviolence initiatives intersect with some of the anti-trafficking work that is done? And I also want to tell everyone, you know, we haven't gone into the 101 on what human trafficking is. If y'all want to do that, you can put that in the chat and we can kind of take a pause and go back. But I know a lot of us on the calls here, on the webinar, do have some grounding on it. But if you want to sprinkle a little info in on that, that would be fine for both of you. But what do you think? How has that intersection happened between what you've been doing and now doing this and seeing anti-human trafficking work in community?
Yeah, so I'll start off by saying when I first got into working with humans on this planet, right? It was youth-centered. It was youth who had touched a variety of systems: foster care, juvenile justice, homeless system at the time, what we call homeless system, substance abuse and mental health diagnoses. All of those systems were intermixed. And I did not come to know the work of trafficking and the anti-trafficking movement, quite frankly, until probably 3 years into that work. And I was devastated because when I knew what I know now, I was like, there were young people who were being trafficked and I missed it. And so, you know, you sit with that, right? And then you act on that. You do more than sit, you act, and you use everything that you got in you to make sure that not just people are protected, right? But also that the places where people spend time are safe. And also, that's interesting. You guys, that's sorry, this is interesting. This is my partner who just joined the call. He probably joined with my link. Thank you for supporting me. I appreciate you. That's hilarious. So the work of through people, but also through places, right? So the places that we spend time, are we ensuring that these places are making space for everyone, right? Like if I know, like, let's say I'm in a library, I'm in a library and I am currently being exploited, right? What do I do? Do I know where to go? Do I know where to turn? Is that place ready to support me in that moment? And then also looking at policies, right? Because a lot of this is written in our legislation. So we can't ignore that. That's a part of this too. So when we look at our policies, are our policies making sure that people who have survived human trafficking are able to be a part of society, to Jamie's point, like once that is over for them? And the answer is oftentimes no. So we have to have a Dr. King calls it a revolution of values. Like we really have to look at our values and ask the question, are we looking at people, places, and policies and making sure that people are protected, that places are safe, and that policies are just? And if they're not, then that's our work to do. Because one of my favorite quotes, and I know I'm quoting a lot, but one of my favorite quotes from Dr. King is, "Power without love is reckless and abusive. And love without power is sentimental and anemic. Power at its best is love implementing the demands of justice. And justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love." So if we're talking about being love-centered, we have to also talk about power. We also have to also look at our policies, the places that people spend time, and are we making spaces that are safe for people? So that's a lot of the work that I get to do. And then there's these big policies, right, that are like at a government level, but then there are also these smaller policies that we have within our organization. Are we looking at those Like we can start there. We don't have to wait for federal or state legislation to make changes within the way that we do this work.
So let me ask you and you both to give some examples of this, because those were some powerful words, and absolutely. And you took me right to a library with somebody who is a survivor or maybe trying to get out of a trafficking relationship, you know, sitting there trying to use the computer maybe to try to find a job. So what are some of the kind of things that we should do, and what sometimes happens that's harmful to that person getting to the next step?
Jamie, I think we can tag team this one. I'll start off by saying some things that I've seen that are harmful, are assuming that that person may or may not be unhoused and shooing them out of the space. They're not welcome there. And I've seen that. But Jamie, I'll let you go and then I'll tap in.
Yeah, well, I think I can add to what you're saying too. Like there's very few places in our society where you can exist and not spend money. In the library is actually one of the few places where you're allowed to do that. But if you're dressed a certain way or you look a certain way, there may be the chance that you get shooed out of these spaces. You know, I think about one specific story where, you know, this girl had been in foster care. She had also been DJJ involved. And I did a lot of youth work. So I feel like a lot of my stories are centered in youth. You know, but she's 17. She had already graduated in one of the detention centers that she was being held at. And then she got placed in this foster care placement that was close to downtown Jacksonville. And the foster parent went to work, I think at 7 a.m, didn't return till 3, and she couldn't be in the house from 7 a.m. till 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And where is she, as a 17-year-old, where is she supposed to go? And there was no safe place for her to go during that time. And sure, maybe she can get a job, you know, but there's no ease in her life. You know, she's just getting out of this program. She survived some horrific stuff, and there's no place that she can go. You know, she's not dressed properly to be in some of the few places that you can go and not spend money. She doesn't have money for herself. And she ended up being re-exploited. So when we think about having safe places, in places people can exist and not be consuming, you know, that not having those places is violence, and looking for how we can create those places is an act of nonviolence.
You know, you're making me think, for those of you who are in our area, I want to just mention a couple of things, or in any area, if you have, and I just thought of this, why don't we have people on our local anti-trafficking task forces and coalitions who are from these spaces where you can be and not spend money? So do we have librarians on our task forces? We should look at all the programs that happen in communities at our libraries. We've certainly met at many libraries here in Leon County. We've done in their freeze meeting spaces, and we also see in our downtown area where our main library is, their churches. So we do have, you know, we do work in community with all of our downtown churches, because a lot of the unhoused populations is right next to the bus station too. So are we talking to people who are doing local free or low cost transportation, right? And it kind of gets into the next area we were talking about, we're going to talk about, which is some of the social safety nets that are there. So how can they contribute or not? Like I see the library as a social safety net, you know, the access to people who can be helpers to those who are, you know, struggling to get to the next stage of their lives. So, so what about some of the social safety nets like that? I mean, what do you think about that? Do you all have librarians on your local task forces? I just want to know, do you? I don't know. We don't, we need to start put them on your boards of directors. What about that? I mean, if you think about it, wow. Gee, that's one of my takeaways already for today. But so what about some of this, the social safety nets that are there? You know, where can we sort of mend the holes in those nets? What's happening? You just gave a great example Jamie. You know, we've got the foster care system, you've got somebody, the mom is working, but she's locked out of her house from 7 to 3 with nothing to do. And where is the support for that family? So you provide support for that family, you're doing anti-trafficking work.
I think for me, social safety nets are something I'm so passionate about, and something I see as a big solution to trafficking. I've lived my life in a way that, not in a way, but in a space that I did not have access to a lot of social safety nets. There was, if I ran into trouble or problems in my life, like the only person there to fix or solve those like problems was me. And you just can't fix everything and solve everything like as an individual. To now like living my life where I have like really robust social safety nets. And when I run into problems or like trouble now, it's like night and day. And for so many of the kids that I've worked with, the youth that I've worked with, for other adult survivors that I know, it really comes down to, do you have like love, care, and compassion like in your community? Like, do you have that in your family? Do you have a set of friends? Do you have that? Are you welcome in spaces where you exist? Are policies welcoming to you? Can you can you walk in anywhere and just be accepted as who you are? And so for so many like of the kids, for so many people who've been exploited, it's really, there's a lack of social safety net, and there's a lack of love and compassion for them. There's a complete disregard by so many people, not everybody, but enough people, for their well-being. When people are being trafficked, they're not invisible. I mean, I hear this, that like it's an invisible crime. It's not. People know where the tracks are. People know what hotels it's happening. People know this stuff. They don't call it trafficking. They use lots of other words, but people know where it's happening. And there's a complete disdain for the individuals who are in those situations. And that disdain means there's no social safety net, not on an individual level, not on a community level, not on a society level. When you feel like no one cares about you, it's very difficult to grasp onto hope that you could live a life where like you're cared about and where it's like meaningful. And so I'm super passionate about social safety nets and trying to create a society where there's no doubt you're going to be born into a world where there's love and compassion for you on all these different levels, not necessarily just from your parents, because parents having love and compassion, even that is not enough of a social safety net. You need more than the love and compassion of your parents. You need communities, you need individuals, you need communities, and you need society like to care about you, to be able to thrive and live a life of meaning.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And yeah, go ahead. Sorry. I was just gonna ask you to comment on this. Great.
Yeah. So two places where I've seen this, right? So there's this center up in DC that is, they call it the Tay Youth Center. And this is a few years ago, but it's transition age youth is what Tay stands for. And so they're youth between 16 and 24 who are transitioning out of foster care typically. But it's really for anyone who's 16 to 24, right? You can drop into this center any time of day. And there's always activities happening. So first off, there's always food. And the food is not like chips, it's like actual food, right? And then there's always at least 3 different activations happening. So one of them is like sewing, you can go and sew. The other is like you can just listen to music and like vibe in the chill room. And then the other is that you can talk to a counselor or receive some type of health or mental health service, right? In this space. And it's open from 7 in the morning to 7 at night. And young people are able to go there. And to Jamie's point, just be. I've also seen very recently, I was up in Buffalo, I was in New York, and there's this center. It's actually funded by a bunch of different folks, but it's housed through a university up in Buffalo. And it is, they have inside of the center a pharmacy, they have a food pantry and refrigerator, so they're like fresh items as well. There's also a space to just chill and be. There's a little smoothie shop where the smoothies are not as expensive as they are up the street. There's art, there are places to sit, and there are places to just be, and it is open to the entire community. And so when I think about social safety nets, I think about where can you be and just belong? Like, you don't have to explain your existence. You just get to belong because you are human. And when we think about these kinds of things, we have to remember that every single person, no matter what their life experience, carries the spark of divinity in them. They carry light in them. And it's our job to nourish that light, not to squash it. So those are the places that come to mind for me.
Wow, I love those and those ideas, and just even taking the idea of how society sometimes calls the social safety net, that's food stamps, that's welfare, that's, you know what I mean? They look at a very limited definition of what a safety net is. And Jamie, you went into it and just talking about a program like that. That's the idea that you're being supported. That's the idea that as a community, you're saying we care about our fellow human beings and we want to make sure that they can live and thrive. That's why we're called it. We're like survive and thrive, because the idea is that you get beyond the fact that you're safe from a trafficker and go to a place where you can be safe. I wish that maybe later at the end, Graciela can come on, because she talks often about how with some of the even traditional places, say an unhoused shelter, where people are staying, there's often a suspicion that that as someone who works there or goes there to, walk alongside with people sometimes, that there's a suspicion that we going in, we're wanting something. We're wanting something from the person. And building trust is really important in these spaces. And that's one of the things that, I know that Graciela is really, really good at. And I'm sure you both are as well. So even in those spaces, making sure that they're open. Anyway, what do you think? Any reactions to that?
Robin, I one of the lines that you just said, about, people exiting trafficking, escaping trafficking, whatever it is, and being safe from the trafficker. I think the unsafe that feels safer than the unsafe you don't know. And so when you think about like people getting out of trafficking and entering into a world where they're safe from the traffickers, maybe, but they get to a place where they're safe from the traffickers, but then the world continues to be very unsafe in new and unexpected ways. It's difficult. It's just so difficult to exit. And it's so difficult to build a life outside of it. And why are all these places so unsafe? And then I think you can start developing some empathy of there's nothing more scary to me than the unknown. There's nothing that feels more unsafe than the unknown, even if today that feels a little exciting. But for someone who's in a trafficking situation, they know that there's risk and they know that they're not safe, but they came from a world that was unsafe already, and to return to that unsafety and also not knowing how to navigate that world, and not necessarily being any actually safer.
Christine in the chat talks about how there's some trainings for hotel workers. Yes, absolutely. And Stack Pros that as well. And there's some around, which is great. Broward County, there's a place for teens where foster children who've aged out can spend time. It sounds like that's one of these spaces where you can just be, and having a survivor mentor, having the ability to kind of, go into an unknown place and become to be known, and to know it is really a process too, right? So people don't just pop in there and it's a drop in, but it's like word of mouth has to get around and say, this is a safe place. They're not gonna go after you for whatever you can be, like you're saying. So yeah, so let's talk about some practical tips and some ways that, how can we work better as anti-trafficking advocates and people in community? I know we have a few people from DCF, from law enforcement, from some systems that really want to be able to be that safe spot. I think first awareness is key, that we're not going to be perceived right out at the very beginning as being that safe spot. So what are some ideas that you have, both, not beyond just like get an MOU, everybody says get an MOU, we'll do an MOU. That's like, okay, we got to do an MOU, but what do we have to do? Let's talk about some practical tips on how we can believe that people, places, and policies can work together to strengthen these safety nets.
So I can start by talking about people. You said something, Robin, that made me smile when you were talking about the word getting around, that this is a safe place, because word also gets around that it's not. People will talk about that. And so I think part of this is about winning the right to be heard. Like, it's important in this work. Like, oftentimes there's this desire to come in a little heavy-handed with this. And it's like, it doesn't have to be that way. Like a really good example at that place I was sharing about in DC, there was a young person who came who was of transition age and aged out of foster care. And he bought a couple of friends. Like, he just bought some friends. And I watched how the staff interacted. Like, it wasn't great, you're here, let's do all of these things, right? It was like, you're here. Cool, glad you're here. And then from there, over time, the young people started like saying, oh, well, what's that? And what's that? And so then it became this more organic process. And so I think when we're talking about the work of people, we have to just create space for people to breathe, and then to choose their adventure, right? Like, what is the next best step for you? And oftentimes we get a little prescriptive with that instead of letting people drive that. So that's my answer for the people. And I'll talk about policy in a minute, but I want to let Jamie tap in.
Yeah, I am immediately thinking about some of the work that I've done with you, Robin, on the STACK website and in developing the youth and caregiver guide, and even how we went about developing that guide, like talking to like youth and their caregivers and figuring out what do they know about trafficking, what do they feel is important for them to know about it, and for the youth in their life to know about it, and really also coming at it from a place of knowing that youth can be a part of the solution too, and not just, hey, don't get trafficked, like but in a way of, hey, like, we know that teenagers think that other teenagers are the coolest ever, and that parents and caregivers, like, they're just not that cool. And the people even at drop-in centers, maybe they're not that cool. But teenagers talk to each other and have the highest regard for one another. And so, well, how do we tap into that instead of seeing that as a challenge? Well, how do we tap into that? And how do we make learning about trafficking and doing like anti-trafficking work more engaging to them? It's like, well, we're asking them to be a part of the solution. You're not necessarily learning about trafficking so you can protect yourself from it, but so you can recognize it if it's happening to your peers, so you can recognize it if it's happening to an adult. And so for me, that really is like taking the anti-violence work, and like, instead of this like power over with youth, is we're engaging them in the process, and then we're asking them to be a part of the solution. Instead of thinking that we have like all the answers, or to think that this developmental stage just has ridiculous challenges that are too difficult to overcome. And I just think, it's not. Youth want to feel powerful. It's like, we'll give them an opportunity, to feel that power. Because, to the Kristen's quote earlier, like, love needs power to really have influence and to create meaning. So,
you're making me think about part of the toolkit, because we talk a lot about online safety. And when we started to talk to some parents, the parents were like, oh, I know where my kids are. I'm not worried about that. And you were very strong in suggesting, and Graciela and some others too, of know that the youth in your life, their online world is a real world, and you can't just hold it at a distance. You have to enter into it and walk with them there. You have to learn about it. And another thing you talked about is having conversation. That's our first podcast guest too, Liz Kimball, talked about, have the difficult conversations. Don't make assumptions about people. Walk with them, invite them in, and see if you can be invited into their world, as opposed to having these disconnects. So I think we're using the word connection a lot as I'm just going through today. Like, that's what it's all about, isn't it? That idea of empathy and love. And it's just really great we're talking about the power of love in an anti-trafficking program too, because I know that the people who are on this call are doing this out of a lot of love and care for their fellow human beings. So thank you both for that. So you were going to talk about policy though, Kristen. You were saying you were talking about people first, and now you want to talk about policy, what we can do. What can we do?
Yeah, I think that the first thing really is about doing some information gathering, right? Understanding what policies are currently up in the balance at the federal and state level, and even locally with your city councils. Understanding, doing information gathering, right, about what's out there. But secondly, doing information gathering about who is in that work. And so, Stack, y'all, based off of today alone, y'all roll pretty deep, which is great. So you have other people who are doing this work with you, but where is it happening also in your community? And then building, one of the things that is really important is this idea of building coalitions, finding partners in this work who are doing this work that is the same as you, but also finding partners who are doing work that's different than yours, but ties to you. Because what that does is when you go and you do advocacy work, then you're pulling on different strings, and eventually whatever it's holding up is going to fall. And that's the goal. And so if you create you cast this wide net, you know what everyone's doing because you've done this information gathering, then you educate, right? These are the 6 steps in nonviolence, but then you educate, right? You educate the people that you're working with, the coalitions that you're involved with, because that's all a part of this. Because one of the things that we know is that if you have a good number of people, right, behind an idea, and you mobilize folks, you're going to more than likely see change, versus if it's just you, or if it's just you and the people who do this very specific work. It has to be a wider net. It has to be more people involved, because then they begin to see why your work is important. And that's one of the things that Jamie and I have talked about a lot in the anti-trafficking movement. Is it's not just anti-trafficking work. It's so much bigger. And when you bring all of these partners to the table who can say, this is how anti-trafficking work affects workplace culture. This is how anti-trafficking work affects youth systems. Then people begin to understand what's in it for me, why this is something that I should be tuned into. And then that's where you get a lot of movement.
Absolutely. And Jamie, do you have anything you want to add to that? Any policy ideas or things we can do or should do as organizations? I mean, I love the idea of everybody pulling on something that's, needs fixing, whether it's unjust or unjust, or whether it's something that just is there, that we all pull different parts of it to get it to come down, and we change it, and we retool. Jamie, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, when I think about like policy, whether it's federal, state, local, individual organization,
Mhm.
the whatever the goal or the mission of either the piece of, you know, the policy or, you know, the organization, is that whoever, like, the most important stakeholder is the people who are impacted by that issue, or the people who the organization is trying to assist. And far too often, pieces of legislation and, you know, policies and even organizations operate just completely suspended and apart from the individuals that it's going to impact most, and from the individuals that they're trying to assist. And so, you know, for me, like, anti-violence is including an anti-trafficking work survivor voice, and ensuring that survivor voice isn't just included marginally, but survivor voice is like elevated, and that survivor leadership is welcomed and encouraged. Survivor feedback is welcomed and encouraged, you know, because the same way youth will talk about if a program is good or bad, survivors talk about how they feel about, you know, different organizations, whether they were interacting with an organization, you know, to receive services, or whether they were interacting with the organization professionally.
Mhm.
And there are places that are deemed safe, and there are places that are deemed unsafe. And so, you know, anti-trafficking work is about including survivors, but further than that is including survivors in a way that they feel safe showing up. Like, Robin, I always feel safe showing up with you. I always feel safe showing up with Kristen. But there are places where I have shown up and not felt safe, and I have regretted being, you know, for example, you know, I did this radio show. We're live on air. I said, I'm not talking about my story. I'm not sharing my story. Happy to talk to you about the work I do. We are live, and the first question this guy asked me is to talk about my story. And it's like very unsafe and like uninformed by the survivor who's in front of him saying, I don't want to talk about my story. Luckily, I'm good at pivoting, and we didn't have to go there, but I shouldn't necessarily have to be like learning those skills. I've just been there so many times with different people, that I was prepared for that. But anyhow, yeah, finding ways to include survivor voice that is love-centered, but also gives them power to influence change in that organization, or really elevates the work that they as individuals or in their own organizations are trying to do.
And can I take that a step further, Jamie? That survivor voice shows up in different ways. It does not always have to be voice. So there are going to be some people in every single movement who are the people who are like, give me the megaphone and we're going to do this, right? And then there are some people who are like, nah, I want to create the beautiful art piece that people are going to stand in front of, or I want to play this song. That one of the ways that my heart got so blessed once was I was in this session and this young person was like, my reflection as a song, is that okay? Absolutely. Right. Whatever your voice or the way that you show up in this work, that is a part of safety, is allowing people to show up in a way that is true and authentic to them, and not telling them the way that they have to show up. But making sure that they are always not just a part of the voice that's a part of this work, but a part of the decision-making, a part of the planning of this. All of that matters.
Yeah, so practically speaking, it's not like, oh, we've planned this entire, you know, fundraiser, and now we want to, I'm going to be really blunt because I've heard people say this, is let's get a victim to speak, to tug on people's heartstrings. I mean, literally, that's what some groups say. And it just is horrific. It's exploitative. It's all the things that is violent. I mean, that to me is forcing somebody into a role that is, it's you know, very difficult. And I can't imagine, you know, then what, you know, and a lot of times I don't think people are informed. And this is, again, I'm going to kind of go back to something, Kristen, you said a while ago, I think, which was, how do you inform people of what the circumstance, like just give people information to make a choice, lay it out. This is, however you do that. And as you're saying, if you're doing an event, or if you're doing even a casual training or information sharing session, lay all the information out and get feedback down to, again, I'm going to just say this podcast again, because y'all are going to learn so much if you listen to this podcast. But someone said, how do you want us to talk about you? Do you want to be a lived experience expert? Using the term victim is not good. Or maybe you want to be called a survivor. Maybe you don't want to be called to anything. Just tell me what's comfortable for you. But it's putting someone in the driver's seat who should be there, because their expertise is really what is fundamentally most valuable to driving you to make the right decisions. Because the other part, I'm just going to say it, is we're all going to step in it at some point. We're all going to make mistakes, and understand and approach all this with lots and lots of humility, and with with an open and learning heart, right? Okay, so let's go on and talk about some barriers or resistance that you might have seen. Like, we've touched on some of this, and being a lawyer and from the legal system, I will say it's almost defined by barriers. I mean, we took, in terms of, I won't say barriers, I'll say laws. This is how it is. Someone might have to appear in court, or they might want to engage. There are guidelines, guideposts, strict rules and things like that in the legal system. But how can you work with people in a nonviolent way when we kind of essentially often live in a world that's just full of barriers sometimes? And sometimes we're putting them up and we don't have to. But anyway, what do you all think about what we can do to kind of get through some of those?
For me, one of the first things that comes up is having someone who has had lived experience and who is comfortable speaking and advocating with that lived experience at the table. I think that is one of the main ways that you decrease and minimize harm. You can't say, oh, I've come to this, I came to this great training with Stack, and now I'm ready to go out there and say that, this is what we do. No, you have, what I mean? Like, you can't do that. And I think that when you recognize that, one, you don't have the answers, but you're willing to and open to working with people who have lived experience and have understanding, that's one of the main ways that you minimize harm. And then bringing groups together with a variety of experiences, whether that's somebody on your team who might be a survivor, somebody on your team who might be a psychologist, and maybe the survivor is the psychologist, but like having a group of people come together and look at a policy or a system that you have in place is going to give a more comprehensive view that's going to allow you to see the places where there are challenges. And again, when it comes to places where people need to feel safe and be safe, not just feel, but actually be safe, I think that that is where that coalition building happens. Because if I call Jamie and I say, Jamie, I just went to the courthouse and this was absolutely terrifying. And Jamie's like, I just had a young person I was working with who had that same experience, and she called somebody else. And then all of us are now calling and saying, this is a problem, right? This is violent. Then we already have solutions created that are created through the lens of all of those different people who are at the table. So that's how I see it. But
when I think about like resistance and barriers to, anti-violence, or, some of the challenges that survivors and, other people face. For me, I think there were times when like I just needed to get creative, like as an individual, working with others. I feel like there's a lot of resistance to giving youth autonomy and choice, just as just as a blanket. And I just think there's like a lot of small decisions that we can make with love, and a lot of small choices that we can make with love that like have a big impact like on that like youth. I think about this girl, I went to go, visit her at this like lockdown facility. And she was real playful. She did not seem like a teenager. She really liked to play. And so, I'm like talking with her, and to really like build rapport and, connect with her, before we get into any of the kind of crisis stuff that was going on. I just played with her. We got taken to this room where there's a desk and a chair, and then there's like a chair that's not at the desk. So like which spot is the spot of like power in that room? It's the chair behind the desk. And that's where she walked. And and she just like role played being in charge, and just to give her choice and autonomy in that. And that's like a small individual like interaction. But then when it came to talking about safe harbor placement and her having like a safe place to go to, it was the same thing. It was bringing in those elements of choice. It was knowing like the information collection, like, hey, I know about each of the safe harbor placements that are an option for you. Let's talk about each one and the pros and cons of each one from my perspective, from what I've like learned about them, from what I've learned about them from other youth who have gone to these places. And she was able to choose, which safe harbor placement, based on that, which one we applied to, and all of that. She had really limited choice in her life. There wasn't a lot of autonomy. There wasn't a lot of choice that I could even provide to her, but the spaces that I did. And the spaces where I could give her more information, I did. And then you just extrapolate upon that for, how do you get creative when there's barriers? How do you get creative when there's resistance? And sometimes you can't just grab the megaphone and march in, sometimes you just gotta role play with the kid, and let them feel powerful, and let them know you're not afraid of them feeling powerful. And you build up a relationship. So
that's great. And even speaking about advocacy, like you do, laying out the options, having yourself, you yourself are informed, you've learned, you've done your homework to know what those youth placements, the pluses and the minuses might be, laying it out, and even giving options about where do you want to sit, what kind of soda do you want to drink? Do you want to drink? Do you want soda? What do you want? Just giving all those things and making that people do have options, and then starting from there, because that's exactly what the trafficker has taken away from them from the get-go, are those options. What do you all think? I think we've covered a lot of territory in terms of what we laid out, and we're at about almost to the 10 more minutes or so to go. Do you want to put the questions up and have some conversation with the audience?
Absolutely. That sounds like a winner.
Okay, and go ahead. Are you going to do that? I think you can share the screen. So everybody, what we are going to ask you to do, can you share screen? Are you able to?
Yes, I'm going to do my best to get this up. Give me 1 second.
Okay, well, you do
There we
that.
go. I did it. Okay.
Success. So I'm gonna, as you're doing that, I want to remind people that if you put your hands up, I think what we're going to see is, Cassandra, you're going to be able to unmute people, or can they unmute themselves?
If they raise their hand, I can unmute them.
Okay, so we're going to ask questions, and we really would love to hear your voices. This is, for us, it's the first time we've ever had voices on these Third Friday webinars besides the panelists. So I wish I had a prize I could send people. But if you want to answer these questions, why don't we chat about it, as it says on the slide? Would you like to guide us, Kristen, on on these discussion questions, or would you like me to ask them?
Sure, I don't mind guiding. So we've had a lot of robust discussion today. So let's just start off with the first question, which is, what are some practical strategies or initiatives that can be implemented to promote nonviolence within our communities? Just based off what you've heard today, maybe based off what you've seen, or to Jamie's point, based off of what you created, because this work gets to be deeply creative.
So, all right, we're getting some chats in, having safe, free spaces for survivors. Yes. Yes, and for a variety of survivors. We've talked impliedly about a lot of trafficking, kind of going into the sex trafficking of children area, but I don't know that everything we've talked about would apply to labor trafficking of children, as well as of adults, excuse me, for both sex and labor trafficking. So keep that in mind too, everyone. That same idea of having experts, and maybe for your work, you should think about someone who might have been victimized or whose experience is around labor trafficking as well as sex trafficking. Okay, Amy's chatting in, educating local business owners and free space managers. Having places to go that they don't feel that they can stick out, but are accepted for who they are. So Ashley says, respecting boundaries that the client expresses. So I'd like to know more about that, Ashley. Do you feel like talking? I mean, I'd like to know about what everybody's chatting in, but you can talk if you raise your hands.
And we do have a hand up.
Okay.
So I'll allow them to talk.
Okay.
I think it's me.
It is you. Hi, Graciela.
Hi. I was thinking going to the Carney Center and Hope Community. For the first question, I think it's as simple as, showing families and individuals how a healthy relationship looks like. Because in my own experiences, growing up and growing up in a dysfunctional family, I thought all families were like that, and all families were, violent, and they will, kind of emotional abusive. And I didn't know better. Nobody taught me how, nobody taught me until later. I realized that I could learn how to have a healthy relationship with my family members and friends and, whoever. So I think it can be as simple as that.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So practical things is kind of modeling respectful behavior and inclusive behavior, right?
Right.
So
right.
I'm gonna put the first question also in the chat so we see it. Great. Okay, anyone else on that first question?
I'm with you, Robin. I want to know a little bit more from Ashley. I'm going to invite her to share some more, but respect it if she's not up for it.
Yes, for sure, for sure. Oh, Ashley does want to speak. Okay, Ashley. Thank you. I didn't mean to put you on the spot.
Good afternoon. I was thinking I'm really big on boundaries, and that's just respecting a person and what they want. So that's like if they want to be referred to by a certain name, or if they don't like a certain thing, it's just being able to respect them and meeting them where they are when you're interacting with them, to not be forceful into helping them, I guess, because sometimes we can kind of be too helpful and they may not be ready because they may be overwhelmed. So there's just like respecting them, respecting what they want, listening to them, and then helping guide them when they're ready to the right services and connecting them to that. So that's pretty much what I was thinking. Just kind of respecting where they are.
Thank you so much, Ashley.
You're welcome.
What you're saying makes me think a lot about the stages of change model. And it's this concept of, someone might not be ready for an immediate change. And they go through you know, these stages of like pre-contemplation, so they don't see anything wrong with their situation. There's contemplation, there's planning, there's action, and there's like maintenance. And I think for people working any type of social service setting, but with, you know, trafficking survivors as well, just really like knowing about the stages of change and thinking about, hey, where is this person in the stages of change, and what are the best strategies in working with this person based on like my analysis. So yeah, some people might not be in a place where they're ready to do a 360 on their life. Maybe they're just ready for like a 2% change. Well, how do we work with them on helping them get that 2% change in their life? And maybe that'll lead to wanting more degrees of change. So
Wonderful. Yes,
I
thank you.
Yeah, I love that. I think because we're all in that space, right? Like sometimes you wake up and it's like, I said today was going to be the day that I went walking, and it's not, it's tomorrow or it's 3 weeks from now, but when I get there, I'm going to get there. And when I'm ready, I'll be there. And what I want to know is that someone will again be there to walk alongside me in that process. So, Robin, if it's okay with you, I'm just going to drop the other 2 questions in the chat so that people can just answer those, because I like to be able to see. I'm
so glad you did that. I was getting ready to ask you if we could do that.
I got you.
Okay, good. Especially that third one, y'all, because we've got 5 minutes left, and we've talked a little bit about that second, this a little bit, but anyway, so we've got 2 of them. But I always love the idea of, if anyone wants to respond to those 2 questions, how can we overcome challenges to nonviolence, and what role do you believe you can play in creating a community that prioritizes nonviolence and supports survivors? So anybody want to jump in and talk about how we can overcome, and maybe it's blended into that third question, what can you do and what would you like to do? What's your kind of takeaway? I do see something in the chat. There's a book called Atomic Habit. If you improve 1% each day over the day before, over the course of a year, you will have improved 37%. That is great. Thank you very much. All right. All right. We're putting those questions in the chat. Anybody have any thoughts? What are some of your ideas about what role you can play? And have you been able to see that some of the things that our systems, our barriers, our assumptions can be kind of violent, and how we can turn those upside down. We can make for a more nonviolent community.
while we're waiting for some hands, one thing I thought about just in the prep for this webinar was thinking about how we combat human trafficking, or we're fighting human trafficking, and just thinking about how just inherently like violent that language is. So that was like, as soon as I got this like concept of like nonviolence, like, and I feel like I've been around nonviolent work quite a bit, but actually just sitting down and taking a moment to like, oh, what is that? But what does that really mean? And then like just hearing myself talk, and like when I said frontline earlier, and I'm like combating and I've never liked the term like combating human trafficking. It hasn't been, it's not something I personally say, but it's really popular. Like people, or outside of the trafficking world, like we fight cancer. It's just like, oh man, like how do we do these things like more gently, like more with love and less with aggression? So
yeah, that's right. Work to end. I'll tell you, and just as a tip, we have something called a storybook for our agency, and we have language we use and we don't use. And every time I've worked with a communications firm, the first thing I said is, don't say combat, don't say fight, don't use any violent terminology at all, because that's not going to solve that's not going to win the day. We're getting some comments in about so a lot of collaborations, and I think that that's great. Both you're talking about in Hernando County, there's a DV task force, a domestic violence task force that people come together and everybody can join in. And I kind of challenge everybody to think about this concept of violence and nonviolence as you do your work. How welcoming is your work? How involved are people who aren't usually at the table? How survivors' voices are elevated either themselves or through advocates if it's not possible. Thank you, Kristen. You put in the King Center's link there. I think we need to make sure we have that as part of our kind of show notes to this webinar as well. And if there's anything else, we will definitely put up your suggestions on the website. So that's great. I want to say thank you to our wonderful panelists, to Jamie and to Kristen for your participation and all the hard work you did to prepare, and that you brought your life's work with you today. I really feel that and appreciate that so much for both of you today, and also to our wonderful folks who joined us and participated in the chat and listened, that you were here today. We feel you and we're grateful for your time. That is most valuable. I'd like to also thank Just in Time Training, Cassandra and Lisa, for your help along the way here. To remind all of you that this program is on surviveandthriveadvocacy.org.